Good morning, everyone. I'm Sandra DeCastro with IMS, and I will serve as the host for the session today. The session is titled ECoach, Personalized Coaching for Students in Large Courses. I want to turn it over to Ben Hayward, who is with the University of Michigan, to kick things off and to introduce his co-presenter. Ben?
Thanks, Sandra. Appreciate you having us. Let me go ahead and share screen and happy to get us underway. All right. Well, hopefully everybody can see. I'm Ben Hayward. I'm the Director for Educational Technology at the University of Michigan Center for Academic Innovation. And I'm joined by my co-host, Associate Director for Behavioral Science, Holly Derry. And we're excited to be talking to everybody about ECoach, one of our applications that we've developed here at CAI. So, just to really quickly give a bit of context in terms of what we're going to be covering over the course of the day, we're going to be talking about why we developed ECoach. And we're going to be talking a bit about who it's for and how it's helping to support students, instructors, and researchers. And then there's a lot of exciting work underway in terms of thinking about the future of ECoach. And so we want to share a bit of what we're planning with everyone. So maybe just to move things forward, why did we develop ECoach? And so ECoach, bridges a gap. And so it really helps to think about, the context in which it was first developed. Dr. Timothy McKay, who is the founder of ECoach, had a problem in his 900 student physics courses where he wanted to try to figure out how to help each individual student succeed in their studies, but he realized that he would never be able to actually have a personal conversation with each and every one of them. Even if he were to schedule office hours with each one, he would basically be done with the semester by the time he'd had an individual personalized conversation. And so, he really set out to think about with these foundational courses, these are some of the biggest courses on campus. They're early gateways. They're some of the most punishing courses in many students' academic careers. They're only 1% of the University of Michigan's courses, but they account for over 33% of student credit hours. So how could he help students in these courses and in these contexts to get that personalized coaching, to get a tool that would help them to succeed under these circumstances. So when we think about ECoach, it was developed using the data that the University of Michigan has available. It uses personalized technology to try to map students to their circumstances. It tries to think about the course and what we know about them, and it puts it all together to focus on, what's most important for a student in their context at their point in time, thinking about the behaviors that we know both from general academic research, but also from the context of these courses that help students to be successful. And it provides mechanisms for students to reflect on what they're doing and what's coming up in the course and what are the activities that they're going to choose to pursue, and to think about how they might adapt or update their behaviors and their strategies to be most successful. So with that, I'll transition it over to Holly to talk a bit about the student side of things.
Great. All right, if you want to go forward one. I think I have a bit of a delay. Well, okay, so this slide shows sort of a bird's eye view. It's the 30,000 foot view of kind of how ECoach comes together with all the parts that go into it. So number one is the data. So we have data coming in from multiple sources. We're integrated with the student information system at University of Michigan. We're also integrated with learning management systems. At Michigan, we use Canvas. We also sometimes have data coming in from other sources like homework tools or exam tools. And we also ask students questions directly. So we have all of that data coming in at the label of number one. At the label number two, we also we use that data to inform some of our content strategies. So we think about interviews we've done with students in the past, or some of the meetings that we have instructors for everything we know about the course. And my team of behavioral scientists put that all together and try to think about what should we tell students and when, so that we get the right message to the right person at the right time. We build that strategy, number 3, in our tailoring system, Michigan tailoring system. That's where we construct our surveys and the tailored messages that will go out. Everything then is pulled together and displayed in ECoach, number 4 on the right. We've tried to make ECoach as usable as possible for students and easy to get to. So we have single sign-on at University of Michigan. We also have some Google integration, like their calendar. They can sync some things with their calendar in a couple of places. So that's the 30,000-foot view. The next slide talks a little bit about how that comes together on the administrative side. So this is sort of our back end. This is what the content managers, behavioral scientists, and sometimes even course staff use. This is the place where we can go in to test and publish the various things that go out to students. So messages, emails, text messages, surveys, to-do lists, and exam playbooks. And I'll talk about the exam playbooks in a minute. Here we can also manage any of the grades that are coming in from gradebooks, from Canvas or Moodle, as well as our research, like if we're doing A/B tests or running interventions, and where the buttons say institutions and coaches, that's where we can also move from across the various coaches at U of M. We have 10, and we also have 5 or more institutions that we can go across. So we try to keep it all organized. Next slide. So this is an example of a single tailored message. This is one of our most, I'm sorry, this is the homepage. So in the upper left, you see we have what we call the featured tailored message. That's the one that is mapped to whatever's going on in the course. On the bottom left, we have the to-do lists. They can be tailored on anything we know about students. They're usually week to week, and they represent sort of due dates or reminders for that week for the students. In the upper right, we have a visualization of the points that they have earned so far compared to what's coming up ahead of them, to try to give them a big picture of where they are in their points in their final score. And that links to the grade calculator, which shows them grades they've earned so far, as well as they can enter hypothetical grades to see what impact it may have on their final grade. And then the last thing we call out here is the exam playbook, which is a strategy and planning tool developed by one of our research partners, where students can look at a long list of resources that they could use to study for their exam. They choose which ones they think they will. They write a little bit about why that resource will help them, and then make a plan for where, when, and how they'll study, and they can sync that to their Google Calendar 7 to 10 days before the exam, so that they're strategizing which resources to use and planning when and how they're going to do that. This slide shows one of our most highly tailored messages. The example here is for students who have gotten above a certain threshold on exam 1. We don't show this histogram. So the histogram is personalized, as you can see, their grade is highlighted. We don't show this for students below a certain threshold because we figure they may not want to see their grade in their face if they're not happy about it again. The paragraph that's called out beneath the histogram has 30 permutations. It's based on the grade they got, how they feel about it, and how they felt about their studying. So like I said, there are 30 different versions of that paragraph alone. The other side of the message, it's the second half of the message. We encourage them to think about what might have gone well or what might have gone wrong on their exam, and try to think about what changes they might make for the next time, as well as to think about how to put this exam in the context of the whole course, so that they're not just thinking about the one exam, but how they're approaching all the other components of the course. So this is the grade calculator that I talked about. The left half shows what it looks like when they see all the components of the course put together in their final grade. The right half shows the features that we have where we show them what grade they have earned so far, or they can enter hypothetical future grades to see what impact it might have on their final grade. The next slide then is kind of a close-up of the to-do list. So if you look at the top, you can see the tiny arrows on either side of the dates. We usually have 2 weeks open at a time, so students can always see this week and next week and plan ahead. Any item can be tailored. So for example, if Monday, Wednesday sections have different due dates from Tuesday, Thursday sections, we can tailor on that. And we can also tailor on whether they've completed something in the past. So a reminder doesn't show up for a second time if they've already done it. And I wanted to draw your attention to a newish feature at the bottom where they can add their own to-do list items now. Now we'll move into talking about how we work with instructors. So instructors are really the heart and soul of our messages. We meet with them pretty regularly, and we have a very close relationship with the instructors of our courses so that we know each week what the priorities are. We gather from them some of their best case stories and their worst case stories, the best practices for all the components in the course. And we ask them, you know, if someone comes into office hours, what would you say if this and that and the other is true of them? Then we take all this information from them and we write it up and deliver it wherever it makes the most sense in ECoach, which might be in the to-do lists, it might be in emails, in our longer form tailored messages, or in testimonials like what's shown at the right. We've also been working lately with faculty from new institutions. We have been working on a pretty big expansion of ECoach over the past year and a half. So UC Santa Barbara, University of Pittsburgh, and University of Minnesota are all in various stages of sort of staffing up and you know, making a team sort of like ours that will handle ECoach at each of their institutions. So that's been an interesting journey for us to figure out, you know, how do we help ECoach be usable for people who haven't been using it for 5 years like we have, and you know, what can we learn from the places where the instructors are writing their own content. Penn State brings us an interesting perspective, which is that they are offering it to one course on multiple campuses. So that's interesting for us to think about too. So we're sort of asking ourselves, what features can we be adding, and how do we make this experience as, you know, as good as possible for people using it in different situations. A bit of our expansion story. So since June, we have been offering tailoring system as well as ECoach training to the tune of 22 hours or so, that not including 70 office hours that we have over the last year or so. If you look at each of the coaches at each of the institutions, we have invited over 26,000 students to use ECoach. In the courses, we have a roughly 80% participation rate. That doesn't include this term because it's too early in the term to include, to know how many people are participating, but from fall 20 and winter 21, we have an 80% participation rate in all of our courses. And we so far have a total of 55 coaches that have gone out.
Well, and I'm here to jump in on how ECoach helps researchers. So, you know, one thing that, you know, we like to think about in our work at the Center for Academic Innovation is sort of the concept of translational research, and how does practice and technology create opportunities for researching, you know, impact and the classroom, and how can that feed back into improving, you know, the technologies to have ever better outcomes. And so if we think about, you know, a variety of the different researchers that we've collaborated with on ECoach, you know, there's a range of, you know, different activities from partners across higher education. You know, so we've ECoach has been deployed both to study the impact and the efficacy of ECoach, and we're able to see the sizable contribution that ECoach can make to students' grade outcomes, exceeding a third of a letter grade, in cases where, it's sort of fully deployed. But it's been the vehicle for numerous other research interventions as well, and publications from, dozens of researchers in areas like, gamification of incentives, in terms of helping with practice quizzing, to thinking about nudging around behaviors with, auto graders and engagement with homework systems. So, I think if we think about the wide sort of range of data sources available to ECoach, both the learning management system, the student information system, but also the surveys where we can collect a variety of different pieces of information about the student themselves, how they're feeling about the course, and sort of their affect and attitude at any given point in time. And then we're able to pair that with things like A/B testing and randomized control trials. We're able to do a wide variety of, pretty flexible, interventions within that context. So this is an example of some of the different researchers that have contributed to ECoach, as well as a list of some of the different publications, that have been done there. And of course, I clicked on a link. So let me switch back and go back to presenting. With that in mind, hopefully people can still see my screen. So if we think about some of those impact studies, I mentioned it a bit as well, but students who use ECoach more, we regularly see that they earn higher grades than those who use it less. An example of that translational research that I mentioned was the exam playbook feature, where students were basically shown to be more self-reflective about their learning and using resources more effectively. And so this was a metacognitive intervention developed by Patricia Chen, who is now at the National University of Singapore. But it really focuses on strategic resource usage and really thinking about how to be planful in your preparation for an exam, but also reflective after your exam about what study strategies may well lead to better and future success. We also see that things like the to-do list and the exam playbook, help students recover from academic distress. So if we think about some of the different early warning systems that are in play, we're able to see students move between categories of sort of at risk to successful, or in true academic distress, up to sort of a more recovering pathway. And so thinking about having those different tools within ECoach for the different situations that a student might be in, and how we can use the information that we have about ECoach to nudge students towards those most effective resources. So I think with that in mind, Holly mentioned a bit about some of the usage growth and potential that we see within ECoach. So ECoach has been up and running on the University of Michigan's campus since September of 2016. It's regularly used by more than 60% of all University of Michigan undergrads in those largest, most difficult foundational courses, in subjects ranging from statistics to computer science to chemistry to biology. So, I think, it's really become a foundational piece of the University of Michigan's infrastructure. But then we're also really excited about the expansion to other institutions and thinking about how we can have impact across a larger swath of higher education. So thinking about places like, University of Pittsburgh, California, Santa Barbara, Minnesota, Penn State, and the National University of Singapore as some of the next places we've expanded ECoach to, and gotten those different campuses fully set up with it to deploy in their courses as well. And then something that we're particularly excited about is that while ECoach was originally developed for a course context, the flexibility of the platform and the technology has shown that it actually has a wide variety of uses outside of assisting students in their courses. So we're actively partnering with the Michigan College Advising Corps, as well as the Center for Educational Outreach on coaching high school students in their preparation for college and their admissions process therein. With the Sweetland Writing Center at the University of Michigan, we're partnering with helping PhD students in the actual writing of their dissertation. So something that is on the complete sort of other side of that academic experience. And then we're actively partnering with University of Michigan's College of Engineering and their Immersed initiative, which is focused on competency-based learning and preparing students for the workforce and engineers, sort of learning skills around some of the more sort of softer skills, you might call them, in things like teamwork and leadership, and how they can be coached in those directions and be making regular progress and getting feedback within that. So if we think about what's next, those are some of the things that we currently have in motion, but we're also really thinking about how we can expand to more courses and more institutions. We're actively looking at how ECoach can be used within the degree context and thinking about online degrees and where we can use all of the data that's available to ECoach to create some different, sort of early warning systems, as well as some intervention techniques that can help students with their sort of overall college journey, in addition to their in-course experience. In partnering with the Center for Educational Outreach, we're also thinking about a broader intend to attend initiative that would sort of span across more of the state of Michigan and beyond, thinking about how we can really be encouraging pre-college students, even starting in like 8th grade or 9th grade, in terms of how they can be deliberate about preparing for higher education and their future path, whether that's at the University of Michigan or elsewhere. And then thinking about the competency platform, we're really excited about the work that we've done with the College of Engineering, and we're actively working on expanding that out to the University of Michigan's medical school, as well as to the business school, and thinking about those sort of diverse contexts where competency-based learning, is still a highly in demand, sort of area that they're looking to grow students' overall sense of competency across their academic career. And we really see a productive pairing between that and the degree space. So I think those are some of the areas that we're heading next, but do want to share our website as well as an email address where you can always reach out to us at the Center for Academic Innovation, and want to pause there if there's any questions that we can answer.
If I could maybe ask a question about the implementation for this. So is this is ECoach a freestanding web app that then relates to these other points in your ecosystem?
Yeah, so it is a web application, that will basically plug into a learning management system, a single sign-on, all things of that nature. That said, I think Holly did mention it has a number of capabilities that are sort of beyond the freestanding web application. So it's able to operate in via emails, text messages. The actual implementation with the competency platform is, using ECoach, as a service that is consumed by another application. So it has a lot of different flexibilities there.
Okay. Does it communicate with Canvas through an LTI then?
Yeah, so it communicates both through, the Canvas APIs and sort of OAuth 2, and then it has, sort of the LTI equivalent capabilities there.
Okay, thank you.
I do see a question in the chat about if this has been implemented with other LMSs than Canvas. So the answer is yes. So University of California, Santa Barbara uses Moodle. And so, so I think, it really is just, both taking advantage of, both sort of the LTI capabilities within modern learning management systems. We're also in some of those online degree courses that we talked about, or that online degree sort of initiative. We're looking at integrations with Coursera as an additional extension there. So, so I think it is not Canvas specific, although the majority of our current partners are Canvas institutions.
Well, I have another if we have a moment. When you mentioned randomized A/B testing, is that used more in the context of like iterative curriculum development, or is it more for research towards external publications, or both?
Yeah, so Holly, do you want to take this one?
Sure, yeah. It's more toward publications and internal use. So sometimes we will run A/B tests or interventions and we share the information with the instructors, but mostly it's for our own research, or we're partnering with instructors partner with us, but it's generally driven by us or the outside researchers that on the slide that Ben showed. Some examples are, right now we're testing different varieties of emails that we can send to see if we can encourage more ECoach use in courses that don't have extra credit. So that would be mostly for our purposes, right? We've also done a pretty extensive look at values affirmations exercises within the context of ECoach. That was for publication. We worked with the instructors so that they knew when it was coming out, and we negotiated with them to get precious extra credit so that we can encourage students to do it. But the A/B testing and research is generally not about the curriculum. It's mostly about ECoach's features or capabilities or impact in student success.
Yeah, and the only thing I would add there is, it's one of the sort of advantages of the platform, but also sort of the abundance of choice and options. So, the capabilities are, you can basically configure an A/B test, with a couple clicks, or you can actually make it a full sort of stratified, RCT with a couple more, but then it's how do you want to use them? And so, one of the main ways that we have used that full RCT functionality has been in some of the bigger sort of psychological interventions that are targeted at things like, gender performance differences. So, so some of the tools there, but at the same time, we are able to leverage those to say, assess the efficacy of a nudge campaign. And is that something that we should be deploying more broadly? So I think, there's a lot of flexibility there.
Oh, that's fantastic. Thank you.
If I could ask a question, have you ever analyzed the students that don't take advantage of this at a broader look than just the in-course performance? The reason I ask is we had done something much more limited where we were giving students feedback, but similar to you, we had maybe 50–60% who took advantage of it. But one of the questions that came up is are there certain attributes about those students that don't take us up on this that later come back to be challenges in student success? And I was just wondering if you had tried to take a more holistic look at those students who don't avail themselves to this.
We have, yeah, this concern runs through our blood. It's what keeps us up at night. So we did some really, really interesting cluster analyses, probably about a year and a half or maybe 2 years ago, where we looked at which characteristics of students, as well as patterns of ECoach use that we could find in clusters. And there were probably 4 or 5 main clusters that arose out of this research, and it's probably exactly what you might predict, right? There's some, GPA matters a lot. The grade that they want to get in the course matters a lot. Their previous experience and interest in the course, and then sort of how they see themselves as a student. And you know, we saw some really clear patterns in terms of who uses it more and who uses it less. There's a category that in healthcare we would call the worried well, where they're likely to be successful and their GPAs are high, but they use ECoach all the time, and check the grade calculator every single day after, say, week 4 or something. So even though they are a high performing group, we still worry about them because to me, that's sort of a signal of anxiety, right? Then there's also another cluster where their GPA is a little bit on the lower side, their confidence is on the lower side, their goal grade is on the lower side, and they intend to do not very much in ECoach. So, you know, we have to think about these folks a lot, and what value, what can we add to ECoach to provide them value? What can we change about it? What can we change about their perception of how much effort it is? So we're constantly thinking about this, and we're hoping to redo some of these cluster analyses so that they don't include the ECoach engagement, but just what we know about people at the beginning of the term, so that I can tailor on it and sort of target recruitment and early messages differently.
So if there's no other questions, I'll just one other follow-up that I've always wanted to explore, and I'm just curious if you had done this, and that would be that I think when you see what you would see, at least what we saw, was that students had similar patterns across courses. And what we never looked at, which I've always wanted to, was the question of when a pattern changes significantly downward. And especially for students that have been in sort of that high anxiety, that really to me is an indicator of mental health issues probably taking place. And I'm just curious, you know, we were trying to sort of think of this as an early warning system for figuring out how do we do check-ins and stuff like that. But I'm just curious if you've had any discussions with your counseling or student affairs or others to be thinking about it in that context as well.
We have, not in ECoach exclusively, but we have another tool that is used by advisors at the University of Michigan, and it's an early warning system. And that one has a really interesting combination of pieces in the algorithm, which includes what they got on their last assignment compared to everybody else in the course. So it sort of adjusts for whether it was just a particularly difficult assignment or not, as well as how often they're logging into Canvas compared to other people in the course. So there's this normative aspect of it that I think is interesting. So it's not so much whether their pattern has changed like you described, but it is about whether they're sort of an outlier in the course itself. Right. And that algorithm has put people into sort of a, you know, a high, medium, and low level of distress. But we're restarting these conversations as we think about the possible use of ECoach in degree programs, because you know, we'll have to provide services and outreach to online students just as we do residential students, and ECoach may play a part in that. And so we want to think about this very carefully, exactly as you described.
All right, thank you.
Yeah, and I think I would just add, you know, this is an area that we are, we're sort of actively, you know, considering how to expand ECoach to fit that need. I think that the analyses that we've done have really looked at how do we control, you know, for assessing sort of student performance and engagement relative to the sort of more normative information that we have about them. So, you know, it's we talk about it as like, you know, grade performance difference, you know, and thinking about the grade penalty of a course. And so then assessing, you know, are students having, you know, unexpected or negative direction. You know, I think one of the research studies that, you know, is mentioned in the slides, you know, sort of looked at that early warning system that Holly mentioned and was able to look at sort of the positive side of things in terms of, if a student really was in sort of academic distress, and they then used, say, the reflection portion of the exam playbook, which is really about sort of taking stock of where you're at, thinking about what strategies you might deploy for next time, or started to engage with, say, the to-do lists, we saw that that was, positively, that was positively correlated. That was a strong indicator that students would exit that sort of bucket of academic distress. And so we've seen things in that direction. Now, what wasn't studied as much is students in the other direction. Were they using those things, and then did they stop? So like, was a student sort of using the planning side of the exam playbook, and then they stopped using it, and then they started to move in a negative direction? So I think that would be definitely an interesting area for further investigation.
Maybe to pick up on that, Ben, I was wondering, do you have any data on the change in maybe a pass rate for a course after implementing ECoach? I know that there's a trick with the selection bias on the students some of the students who are likely to engage with a tool like this to help performance might have been students who would have done well anyway. Or I don't know if you've done kind of a randomized assignment on who has access to ECoach.
Yeah, so I think some of the early work did do some A/B around access to ECoach. I think we quickly sort of saw that ECoach helped, and so then you lead to the, well, do no harm. So at that point, we've moved more towards testing different aspects of ECoach and where that would work. I think we definitely do see those grade performance differences, and sort of the positive use with, or the positive direction those take with ECoach usage. So we definitely see higher pass rates. An additional sort of thing on the other side that we've examined and studied is withdrawal rates as well. And so basically, when do students withdraw? What sort of grades do they have? And when and where can ECoach sort of help to almost assess the threshold or the cut point that students are at, where they should be making, sort of an informed decision about what behaviors they would need to engage with, to be successful prior to that withdrawal rate happening. And so that was a particular concern in a computer science course that we partnered with. And so I think, we were able to, definitely see some of the impact of basically having that information on the front end, and knowing what the sort of strong predictors are of success in sort of passing the course, and then providing sort of students guidance and information around that, so they can make informed decisions.
That's fantastic. Do you know if any of that earlier research was written up on your website, for instance?
I don't think the withdrawal rate was, because that was particularly for an instructor that we were partnering with. The
Sure.
other side of that, though, the basically all the work with the clusters and some of the outcome measures, and and the ways that ECoach is efficacy is correlated with performance, that was written up by Becky Matz in the latest Learning Analytics and Knowledge conference. And so there are links to that both on our site and in the slides, which we're happy to share out.
Fantastic, thank you.
I'll add to that too, that I think our partnership with Penn State provides us an opportunity to do some A/B testing, because as I mentioned, they're running coaches in the same class, but on different institutions. And so they may have, the same math class, for example, but not on all 28 of their campuses, rather only 2 or 3 of them. So that's, a bit of a naturalized experiment.
Wonderful. Yeah, and I mean, there are all kinds of institutional limitations on how much you can do randomized experimentation in the wild, right?
Right.
So, and you may have talked, I missed the first 5 minutes, and so you may have talked about this in that part, but one of the things we've been looking at in the academic innovation space, and I really see ECoach as being a tool that can support this, is teaching students in a way that they're able to learn and apply in the next course. And so in many of the sequences that you're doing, I'll pick the chemistry sequence. Well, if you don't remember what you learned in chemistry 101, 102, when you go to organic chemistry, you're at a huge detriment. And we know that there's a significant deficit that students often forget very quickly what they managed to learn to get through the exams in a lot of these courses. And I would think the playbook model that you're developing and study would reinforce learning in ways that would hopefully be very effective for follow-on courses. But I'm just sort of curious if you have studied the effect of ECoach students as they go on to follow-on courses versus non-ECoach students, even if they got similar grades, into that sort of piece of this in the course. Does that make sense?
It does make sense. Yeah, we are hoping that some of our expansion into new courses will include, sort of next follow-on classes. We have the potential in math. We have the potential in computer science. And right now, our coaches focus on study skills rather than content. So I think we should be doing exactly what you're describing. I was going to say something specific and I lost my train of thought. So I get two things. So we have designed the schedule of content that goes out in ECoach was designed to be sort of a weaning schedule. So we have a lot of content up front, and we, when they're captive at the beginning and the really busy load hasn't quite started yet, we give them a whole bunch of stuff that they can poke through. Then everything that happens after kind of those first couple of weeks is doled out based on their exam or assignment schedule. And the tailoring is more intensive at first. And then after the halfway point, it sort of, subsides a bit so that they're starting to practice some of the stuff on their own. Patricia Chen, the researcher we worked with on the exam playbook, has also developed a new scale. Two things. She is in the process of publishing a paper about multiple playbook uses. So that would speak to our students generalizing this skill of strategizing around exam studying to their next exams, even if playbook was not offered. And out of this playbook research, she has also developed a new scale called strategic mindset. And that one has a lot of potential too, I think, to sort of to develop an intervention and move students more into thinking about how can I be more, metacognitive and strategic about the way I'm studying, regardless of what the content is. So I think there's definitely more to come there, and we're thinking along the same lines.
Yeah, and just to add a couple things there. So one of Patricia's aims with the development of the exam playbook was to try to almost ingrain that process with students so that it would be less necessary to use an app the next time, and to be thoughtful and strategic about which resources am I going to use to study, blocking discrete time to do that studying and be explicit about what you're going to do during that time. She was hoping that those strategies, would sort of persist beyond the individual context in which it's done. And so I think that's one of the things that's really interesting in the paper that she's publishing around that, is how much is that the case, right? And then I think another piece is that as we're thinking about ECoach in some of these larger sequences, one of the things that we do have the advantage of with our connections to the learning management system and with our connections to the student information system is we know what students got in previous courses, and we can potentially even go deeper than that to the topic level. We haven't thus far, but the ability to suggest, additional resources or have messaging that's more focused on the content itself are things that are, fully possible, and areas that would be really interesting for us to consider, particularly if we start to move to more full degree style coaching. How do we think about those sequences? So I think that's one of the areas we're really excited about, exploring further.
well, if no one else wants to ask a question, I'll just, one more, which is just, well, obviously you're sort of teaching students how to study and how to attack a course in a particular discipline. Are you seeing that this is informing the faculty to be rethinking the pedagogical design and implementation of their courses? So there's sort of a feedback loop that's also happening in there. And, what you would sort of like to have is a virtuous cycle where, faculty are gaining insights that then they're readjusting their course, which sort of also then, help students, but ECoach, sort of is a part of that sort of cycle. And it sounds like you do, but I'm just sort of curious if you have discrete examples of how that's sort of come about.
Yeah, so I think there's some direct ways and there's some indirect ways. So we have just sort of accidentally pointed some things out in, innocent questions that we've asked, like, okay, so I need to think about messages that go out to students about this project and the midterm. So the hardest projects are timed with the midterm and the final. Is that right? So I should think about that. And the instructor would say like, oh boy, I never thought about it that way. And then they change their schedule. There's also a group at the University of Michigan that's focusing directly on this sort of thing. It's called the Foundational Course Initiative. They're working with instructors and cohorts over a 3-year cycle to really examine their class and restructure things. And we work closely together with them because they're in a lot of ECoach courses as well. And so, they know a lot of things about the course. We know a lot of things about the course. And, we're working together a lot to say, here's what we know from ECoach research. Here's what you know from observing the classroom and that sort of thing. And so, together we think about approaches and try to work on this problem as well.
Okay.
Yeah, and I think the other thing I would add there is sort of the reporting capabilities of ECoach, are strong and also something that we're like amplifying. So we're thinking about things like interventions like, the muddiest point and minute paper, and how we can sort of surface and aggregate those sort of pieces of information back to instructors to basically speak to, okay, here's what's, people are taking away from each week in your course, or here's what people are confused about with each week of your course. If we think about the data that's collected in the exam playbook, we can basically say, here was the emotional portrait of your course going into your exam. Here's the resources that they chose to prioritize. And here's on average how many hours of studying they did. And we can break that down. It's like, is there anything you want to change based on that information? We're also seeing like across Michigan, a larger just examination of the examinations period. And are those the right, tool and when? And so I think that that's another piece that's sort of starting to emerge from all of this in terms of some of those high stakes, grade assessments.
Okay, hi, Ben and Holly. This is Kara Jenkins. I jumped in for Sandra, who was hosting. Thanks a lot for your session. We've come to the end, and I know you're going to be doing another demo tomorrow as well. So if people have more information, they can log in then. So yeah. Thanks a lot.
Thank you.
Everyone have a great rest of the conference.
All right.
Bye, everyone. Great presentation.